Hello and welcome to A Friend Remembers in the latest video of 2023, the year of the JRPG Marathon. Now before I get started on the mega Final Fantasy series retrospective, I wanted to do one more game which is a little bit weird, a little bit out there, and I can't think of anyone I've enjoyed more this year than Yakuza Like a Dragon. Now this game is weird in several senses, in that it's actually the latest game of a very long running series set in Tokyo, Japan. It's the first game in the series that is a full RPG, turn-based role-playing game. All of the previous games in the series have been beat-em-up combat action adventures. This one is a Dragon Quest inspired, heavily Dragon Quest inspired RPG, and it wears that proudly. It's really does an amazing job of tying in these classic JRPG tropes and genre staples into modern day suburban Japan and the Yakuza franchise. And it's not a spin-off, it's not a side game. This is the evolution of the main series and the main stories, but you don't need to have played a single game in the franchise that came out before this to understand what's going on. In fact, for 3/4 of the game, it's almost better that you don't have any expectations. To give you a quick rundown, there's been one central protagonist for the Yakuza series up till this point, and it's been chronicling the rise and long protracted slow fall of the Tojo clan, a Yakuza crime organisation which the previous main protagonist was the last stalwart defender of this clan of people, looking out for his friends and accomplices and facing off the truly villainous underbelly of the Japanese mafia. This game does feature the Tojo clan, but for almost the entire runtime, it's got nothing to do with the events that have come before. It's got a brand new protagonist. The original one, I'm not going to say he doesn't appear in the game, but he's not relevant to the main story. In fact, it moves sideways. It goes to a completely different precinct, completely different district of Japan. It sets it up in the city suburb of Kamurocho, which has never really featured in the series before, and it's got an entirely new cast of characters. The main character, despite the fact that he existed and worked for the Tojo clan, he came from the Arakawa household, which is a brand new introduction to the franchise. So all of the people he knew had nothing to do with the previous games. This story chronicles the events of his life that led him to spend the majority of his time in prison, being released as a 40-year-old man into modern day Japanese society, and being a complete fish out of water. How does someone whose last meaningful interaction with society happened around the millennium emerge into modern society in the year 2020 and find that the world has moved on without him? The Yakuza are no longer what they used to be. None of it's what he recognised. None of it is what he can tolerate. Despite the fact it starts with him at the lowest of the low, the story really puts him through the ringer. I've got nothing but respect for the new main character, Ichiban Kasuga, who is absolutely played for perfection. I would say there's a minor pacing issue. It does take a long time for this story to really officially start. There's a lot of backstory to tell here. They want to introduce Ichiban as he was. They want you to spend time in his shoes before he went to prison. They want you to understand what was going on in the Arakawa family, what decisions led to his downfall, what betrayals, other intrigue were going on within the Tojo clan that led to this man spending 20 years in prison, and then when he emerges, being shot and nearly fatally killed by the man he adored and treated as a father. Once he's been shot, once he's been moved to Kamurocho, Ichiban has to rebuild his life from almost nothing. In fact, less than nothing. He spends time in a homeless camp, only has 2 friends in the entire world. He has no job, he has no transferable skills. He's got a black mark because he killed someone, or at least the police think he killed someone, and he spent time in jail for it. And the only people who he ever cared about want him dead, and they think he is dead. So he has to hide out in Kamurocho, and for 3/4 of the game, you're just following him and this small core group of characters as he rebuilds his life from scratch. And after that it's slow, but the introduction, there's a reason it's paced like it is, because there was a lot of backstory in it, and it is all relevant. All of that stuff that went on with the Arakawa family is absolutely central to where the story is going. But the heart and soul of this is the characters of Ichiban Kasuga, his homeless friend Yunamba, and the ex-police officer Koichi Adachi. Now, Adachi and Nanba are very well realised characters themselves. They both have goals. I kind of wish Adachi's was more tightly pulled into the main plot. There's a good reason he's involved, but I would say that him wrapping up his personal storyline feels more like an afterthought. It's excellently done at the end of the game, but given how important he is for actually pulling the reason of all the characters there together, I kind of wanted more from him. But Nanba, on the other hand, and I'm not going to give any plot spoilers, Nanba's storyline is absolutely devastating. There's a reason that this ex-nurse is living homeless on the street. There's a reason he doesn't want to talk about his past. There's a reason he's on the streets of Kamurocho, living hand to mouth in the dirt. And I remember seeing some dialogue online when this came out. Some people thought that Yakuza Like a Dragon was making fun of homeless people. It really isn't. It's trying to half-heartedly seriously draw attention to people at the bottom rung of society. People who our politics doesn't offer any hope to. And this is true for Japan, it's true for other countries as well. There are lots of places where once you've fallen off the ladder, once you are out of sight of the support services, there's almost no way back in. And it's kind of central to the main storyline and what the Yakuza are for. I mean, this is a fictional story based on a Japanese crime family, but it's kind of the point of these crime families pick up the dregs of society and they put them to work, either as bouncers, enforcers, thieves, pickpockets, or for the female members of society, much, much worse. There's a large part of the storyline here that revolves around a soap house, a place where men come to and get bathed by willing women wearing not very much clothing, looking after them, offering all sorts of erotica. The storyline introduces just one core female character, and she is absolutely, after Ichiban, probably the second best character in the game. Saiko is a really core member of the party. The core cast is heavily lent towards the lads area of the makeup. There's only one core female character, but she stands her own ground. She really makes an impression, and I really enjoyed just walking around the streets of Kamurocho and having the characters talk to each other. And despite how male-centric the storyline goes, there's a camaraderie between these main characters who look after each other, who care about each other, who recognise each other's faults. There are more characters that you recruit after these initial four, but these are the four you'll be playing with for the majority of the game. And the storyline ties in why people fall into the life of crime. It ties in immigration into Japan, particularly Chinese and Korean immigrants, people who don't have visas or a right to work, a right to live in society. And it offers the contrast between the structure of a crime family versus the structure of politics. A large theme of this game is the hypocrisy of people who campaign on the political stage and say, we're going to clean up the streets, we're going to make things better, but they don't really have a plan. They don't really care about the people at the bottom, save for finding an excuse to shuffle them out of the way, make them invisible, make them out of sight. I really don't want to go into too much of the story, apart from to say that after you get through that initial 2.5, maybe 3 hours of plot, which is heavily cutscene based, this then evolves into one of the best turn-based RPG systems I've seen outside of the Persona series in recent years. You have a job system where Ichiban and the other characters go literally to a job shop. They can be hired as chefs, bouncers, as enforcers, as construction workers, and they'll have completely different sets of skills depending on the outfits that they're wearing relative to the jobs. I kind of wish the job system was more solidly integrated into the main plot, but it is a perfect excuse to outfit your characters in a range of really fascinating different movesets. Some of them are best at healing, some of them are best at offensive, some of them are best at initiating status effects. As you walk around Japan, the streets of Kamurocho, Ichiban will imagine and project a range of fantastical imaginations onto the people that you're fighting and beating up. So it actually ties into the slightly mentally warped perception of the main character as he imagines that the people are fighting him are essentially monsters from an RPG video game such as Dragon Quest, which it's part of the storyline that he idolizes this game, and that he imagines them and all the people that he's fighting as he works his way through the world as monsters and enemies throughout this. The highlights really have to be the boss bosses, there are a selection of characters, some big, some small, and they actually bring in some things like construction trucks and diggers and vehicles as tank-like mega enemies for you to fight. The Yakuza action brawler combat system translates into the RPG setting really, really well. This game has its tongue-in-cheek, it's really light-hearted, it tackles some serious topics, but I don't recommend it because it tackles serious topics. It actually has an excellent, solid, original storyline to tell on its own. And by not playing the original Yakuza games, you're not missing out. When the core characters who are relevant to the previous Yakuza series finally start to enter the scene and become relevant 3/4 of the way into the game, it does an excellent job of telling you these people are important, they exist, they're important players. You don't need to know too much about them. If you have played the previous Yakuza games, there's lots of nods and links to characters from Yakuza 3, Yakuza 6. The game doesn't make a lot of this. If you know, you'll be excited and keen to see these characters again. If you don't, it doesn't matter, you won't feel like you're missing out. This is an excellent entry point to the series for anyone who's not dipped their toe in before. And if you have played the action adventure games before and you're nervous about how it would translate into an RPG, maybe you're not even an RPG fan yourself, I'd heavily recommend giving it a go. Ichiban is going to be one of the most fascinating creations from Sega in a long time, and I absolutely enjoyed every minute I spent playing with him. And I said, given that this story starts with him in a homeless shelter, everyone he knows in his life either wants him dead or thinks he's dead, unable to go home, 40 years old, having wasted his life either in a crime family that hates him or in prison for a crime he didn't commit, on the streets of Japan with no one caring about him. You think he's at rock bottom? He really, really isn't. The final scenes, the final storyline, what happened to the Arakawa family, and how Ichiban's story will conclude at the end of this game is heart-wrenching. And it's some of the best writing, despite the initial pacing problems at the beginning of the game. The way it slowly layers the storyline in and tells you about what happened 20 years ago, what happened 40 years ago, 50 years ago, when some of the elderly characters that you meet in the game were in their youth. Right in the prologue cutscenes, it's all relevant. And the plot twist, and I don't really want to call it a plot twist, but the way that it reveals itself and slowly unpicks those layers is just a masterpiece. There's going to be a sequel, Yakuza Infinite Wealth, which will pick up with Ichiban Kasuga and what happens to his life after the events of this game. I really hope it will improve and build upon where this game went from. But for a solid turn-based RPG, the only criticism I've got at all is just the length of the game. It's really long, and Kamurocho is not that big. There are some points in the middle where you spend just a little bit too long going backtracking back and forth between the streets from one place to another. Also, depending on how you play the game, for a lot of it, and it's relevant to the storyline, you won't have a lot of money. Cash is not readily accessible, depending upon what you do on the one significant side quest that can introduce a spare optional side character, which is not the best side quest in the game, but if you unlock it early and get that side character, you'll have tons of cash and the mid-game will be far easier. But on the other hand, that doesn't really fit with the storyline. Other side quests, there's kart racing, there's lots of gambling and card games and mini-games. The Yakuza series is known for throwing in these mini-games. It's got some old Sega arcade games. It really ties into the Sega history. Without going into spoilers, there's not a lot more I can say apart from to heartily recommend Yakuza Like a Dragon.